The move ability allows us to move the object around the world, whether it's controlled by the player, or a movement action, or just scrolling in the shmup section. You can adjust these properties to adjust how it moves. The scroll multiplier indicates how fast it's going to move in relation to the player's ship in shmup sections. If you set this to 1, it'll be affected by the player's movement speed. If you set it to 0, it will not be affected by the player's movement speed in the shmup. The horizontal and vertical speed are how fast this object moves by default. This is useful if you want to create a character and set how fast they move when the player is inputting commands. Auto scroll allows us to automatically scroll along with the shmup scene. Have this selected for any shmup objects. The player ability gives this object the ability to be controlled by the player. It can be moved around by the WSAD keys, and it can perform actions in the world. Collision will add a collision box to this object. This is useful to prevent players from walking through for certain objects, or to make something take up physical space in the world. The weight option is useful in the shmup section, and it indicates how heavy this object is. Heavier objects will push lighter objects. You can make the collision be a sphere or a box. If you have it as a sphere, you can adjust the radius, which will change the size of the collision, as well as the center position that collider will be on the object. You'll notice that we have a display preview over here to see where the collider is on the sprite. If you select box, the values will change to adjust the X and Y size of the box, and you can adjust the offset by adjusting the center variables. The sound ability allows this object to be able to play sound effects. This is useful if you want a sound to come from a specific object, such as a character actually speaking a line of dialogue. You also have the ability to set up sounds at play when the object changes state. An object state changes when it is spawned, when it is destroyed in the shmup section, or when it's moved off screen. Any of these drop-down boxes allow you to select what sound should play when that state is reached. This is useful for shmup objects when you want to have a sound play for an object when it dies, such as an explosion sound that's unique to that object. The sight ability allows this object to react to other objects when it sees them. The radius is how far in pixels from the center of the object this object can see. You can add layers to indicate that you only want specific layers to be interacted with. This is mostly used in the shmup segment where you want enemies to only see players, players to only see enemies, or if you want something to be unaligned and see either players or enemies. The dialogue ability gives this object the ability to display dialogue text around it. The dialogue height indicates how far from the center the text should display. The fill color indicates the color that will be inside the text. The outline color will indicate the color that will be outlining the text. You can also use this eyedropper tool to select a color that's inside the scene. This is useful if you want to grab a color from the sprite itself. The shmup ability allows this object to be controlled in the shmup section and gives it access to various other abilities. Enemy type indicates what type of enemy this should be. This is useful for the director in classifying how enemies should be spawned at the player. Damage is how much damage this object will deal to other objects when it contacts them. The maximum hull is how much hit points or health it has. Invulnerable time is how long before it can be damaged again after taking any amount of damage. The recharge time is how long before the hull recharges 1 point of health. You can check indestructible to make it so this object will never reach 0 health or 0 hull value. The flash speed indicates how fast we flash the sprite when it takes damage. The flash color is what color we flash the sprite when it takes damage. The flash color value and flash color saturation indicate how much value or saturation offset we have when we flash the sprite. Blend damage will blend the sprite with this color as it takes more damage. This is similar to the effect in old video games when you have an object turn more red the more damage it's taken. The loadout ability specifies what weapons the shmup ship carries by default. When selecting a weapon, you'll get access to all of the objects, so it's important to make sure you select only the ones that are indicated as weapon, and when you create new weapons, that you name them appropriately. The bullet ability indicates that this object is a bullet and should be destroyed when it collides with something. You can add layers so that it only collides with certain types, such as players, enemies, or anything. The ship ability indicates that this ship has multiple gears that it can travel. This is useful for any ship that's controlled by the player, as the player can adjust the scroll speed with their gears. By adding gears, you can indicate how fast the ship moves. We can create gears that allow a slower speed, 1 to set the default speed, or increase it so that it moves faster. These gear names are in correlation with the animation inside a spray animation, and they should be named appropriately so that the correct gear shift animation plays when you shift gears. A Wingman AI ability gives this object the ability to be controlled by the default Wingman AI. The various options that we have are how fast this object moves, how relentless this object is, and how smooth this object goes to its target. You can indicate the target of an object by adjusting these properties in the action Update Behavior AI. The explosion ability indicates that this object will spawn a specific object when it explodes. You can spawn any other object when this thing explodes, allowing it to create new enemies or just simply play an explosion animation. The weapon ability indicates that this is a weapon that can be used on other ships. The display name indicates what will be displayed on the shmup UI when it's selected. Below that, you can select what bullet should spawn when this weapon fires. The zone ability allows this object to be collided with and trigger sequences and actions when it is collided with. It has a bunch of different properties to limit how this zone is activated. The activation limit is how many times this zone can be activated. If you set it to 0, it'll be allowed to be activated an infinite amount of times. Player-only activation means that only the player will activate this, and other AIs or NPCs cannot activate it. Whereas AI-only activation means the player can never activate this. The X and Y size are the actual size of the zone itself. By default, we create it 20 pixels wide and 230 pixels tall. This is tall enough so that it can be displayed in a level and the player cannot walk through an area without gliding with the zone. Zone types indicate what types of objects this zone can collide with. If you've set something here, only those types of objects can collide with the zone. For example, this zone could only collide with both objects and backgrounds, but not things like bullets or ships. If you remove them, then it can collide with any type. Activating states indicate that what state the colliding object must be before it can activate this zone. Either it has to be off-screen, it has to be active, which is visible on-screen, and active means not visible on-screen, or acting, performing specific AI actions. If you select none of them, then it will accept any activating state. Activating enemies indicate what type of enemy the object has to be to activate this zone. This is useful if you want a specific type of enemy to activate an event that happens in the game. The 8-way animation gives this object the ability to move in 8 directions. This is useful for any player character that's going to be walking around in PNC segments.